Welcome to Oh the Humanities, a podcast produced by the University of New England Center for Global Humanities. Our conversations are devoted to shining a light on the important work being done in the humanities at UNE and other colleges across the U.S. and around the world. My name is Josh Pahigian, and I'm your host. Our guest today is Sayvon JL Foster, an assistant professor of sport management at the University of Kansas. Sayvon's scholarship crosses into the field of sport sociology, where he specializes in HBCU athletics, college sport culture, and college athlete experience. He is the founder of the Sport Experience at Special Mission Institutions Research Lab, or to use the acronym, SESME. On Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024, he will visit the University of New England's beautiful waterfront campus in Biddeford, Maine, to present a lecture titled, How College Athletics Shape Culture and Community. And this is actually a very special event for us because the Center for Global Humanities is actually expanding to the Biddeford campus. For years, we've been in Portland, and this is our very first bang-up lecture we're going to have in Biddeford, and I know it's going to be great. Sayvon, welcome to Oh the Humanities.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So summer's really over here. We've been planning this for a while, but you've gotten back into the classroom now. How has that gone?
It's actually been great. So the way this semester's panned out, and I have to say I'm incredibly lucky. My in-person class is about a 50-50 split between former students and new students. And my online course, I'm willing to say about 75% of those students took the course through a recommendation from another friend. So this has been the smoothest semester I've had by far in all the years I've been teaching.
That's great. Those are the semesters we want to have. Wonderful. So obviously Sayvon's work isn't like you're not purely in the humanities as a humanities scholar, but at the Center for Global Humanities, we define humanities very broadly, and we include the social sciences. And your work crosses into sociology. And I think what you're doing, focusing on culture and community and how sport relates to that, is just so very interesting. So I'm really looking forward to getting into some of your work, some of your scholarship today, and learning a little bit more about what you do without spoiling your lecture at UNE. So we won't give away the whole farm, but we'll get into some of the details that we'll convey to our listeners who you are and what you do. So I thought we'd start by just defining some terms for listeners who are not in your fields and just need some familiarity, some grounding. So when we say sport, how is that different from sports? Because I've had students ask me that through the years, and I thought it would be good to just sort of clarify what that distinction is or why we say it that way. So what's the difference between the study of sport and sports?
Oh man, this is taking me back to undergrad. So my building off of what my program coordinator and professor said in undergrad, when you say sport, you're looking at the broader scope of the operation of sport. So the management component, facilities, everything that goes into, like, if you go to a sporting event, all the moving pieces that create that event, versus sports is just the active participation in that particular event. So shout out to Dr. Felder at Winston-Salem State. I remembered what you told us, and it's been seared into my mind from 2012 all the way up until now. So it's been well over a decade. I still remember exactly what you said, Dr. Felder.
I love the shout out. You should send this podcast to your former professor afterwards. And 15 years from now, one of your students maybe will be on a podcast sending a shout out to Doc Vaughn. I think that's what you told me your students call you. So they'll remember too. Sometimes we think our students might not be paying too close attention, but they are, and those little lessons along the way mean so much. So another term to specify for our listeners is special mission institutions. How do you define a special mission institution?
Yes, so special mission institution, this is a broader definition or a broader scope. It's looking at colleges and universities that have a specific orientation or design or community in mind. So that would be HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, military and service institutions. There's a wide gamut, single gender institutions, that these colleges and universities, they were designed for a specific community, their overall orientation, the culture, the operations, caters to that community and creates a educational space. Because if we look at colleges and universities and higher education in general, they were designed to be a reflection of their community, but also to contribute to that space, which is why we have all of these different nuances and all these different institutional types. So that's the broader scope. And I'm actually actively working on illuminating more of these institutions through my work.
Yeah, that's what your lab focuses on. As you learn about those institutions, is there sometimes an opportunity to extend what you learn about them to more broadly focused universities, or is the knowledge that you're creating in that space more so contained to the special mission institutions?
So it's two parts. So the first thing is a lot of my work serves to illuminate and shine a light on these spaces, highlight the unique nuances of these areas. So again, we can expand our knowledge and understanding, but it is applicable to other institutions. Specifically, when you look at sport, there's this idea that you have to look at these high level, high performing models and that you have to mirror what they do. But through my work, you get to see that these special mission institutions are successful, especially when they lean heavily into their identity and shape their operations. So it's almost like a 1-2 punch. We're expanding our knowledge of these other areas, but we're also empowering these other institutions to learn more about themselves, their histories, and leaning into that so they can still be successful while embodying and reflecting what's unique about them.
Yeah. So where we are at the University of New England, we actually started out as two different special mission institutions that later evolved into an institution that I guess you wouldn't consider a special mission institution. Back in the 1950s, St. Francis College was formed. It was a Franciscan-oriented college, and it served mostly the immigrant children of the Franco-American mill workers who lived in the Biddeford area. And then our other campus, our Portland campus, actually started out as Westbrook Seminary. It was a seminary back as early as the 1800s, and then years later, they evolved each sort of on their own track, and in the late 90s, they merged with each other to make the University of New England we know today. And where UNE isn't a special mission institution now, we do cater heavily to first-generation college students. Our president is a first in his family to go to college, and a number of our other administrators and faculty members are also the first from their families to go to college. And we really try to make a special effort to welcome those students, to onboard them if they don't have a family tradition of going to college and they don't know what to expect, to make them at home and to ensure they flourish. So I wonder if you've ever thought about considering that sort of college or university, those focused on first generations as special mission, or is that a little bit too broad?
Oh no, that's not broad at all. So that's actually the beauty of the broad focus of being a special mission institution, is looking at if there are specific nuances or specific orientations. So I know I have a couple colleagues that do a lot of work for rural serving institutions. So these are colleges and universities that are primarily out in the rural parts of the United States. Their recruitment model, their onboarding and their student transition models heavily caters to students that are coming from more rural communities. And I mean, if we look at it from the broad scope of the United States, there's a technological divide in some of the other areas where the way the college and university needs to operate is to, one, bring these students in, help them be comfortable, and help them successfully transition and matriculate through their college experience. We can even see the same with institutions that have a heavy first generation student population. We can look at it from like an income and socioeconomic level. So, I mean, kudos to you all as a first generation college student. I'm actually seeing the ripple effects of being a first generation college student, having a younger sister come behind me and younger family members, to where now that's impacted the way that my family's operated. But I also look back and I see how my alma mater, how they operated when it came to being a institution that served quite a bit of first generation students, to where sports were accessible, campus opportunities and campus resources were either at free or low cost, different things like that, to where, again, you have these students that come in, and if you look at the traditional college model, those prices and those fees rack up. but having an institution where I felt like it wasn't the norm. And talking to some of my friends and working at other universities, our library stayed open until midnight, which wasn't the norm, but they knew that a lot of students were on different sides of technology access and resource access. So our university implemented models to make us successful. So all my love and kudos goes to the institutions that serve those first generation student populations because we need them.
Wonderful. And love and kudos back at you for the important work you're doing. Um,
Mhm.
so I was wondering, what are some of the projects you're working on? What are some of the more interesting discoveries you've made, things you've learned about special mission institutions, about how sport and culture combine in this space? Tell us a little bit about your work. Couple of the things that are highlights of your lab's knowledge so far.
Oh man, so I'm currently working on a 7-part series. So essentially, it's looking at cultural reproduction and how these embedded elements of culture and society, either within the university or within the surrounding area, how that's bled over into the operation of our current colleges and universities. And I'm in particular focusing as special mission institutions. So one of the examples I'll give, and part of it is because it's my alma mater. I went to Texas A&M for my PhD, and what a lot of folks may not truly realize is Texas A&M's connection to the U.S. military and their deep, rich military history, and how a lot of components of that militarism is still very much evident within their sport experience. So if you've ever seen any images of Kyle Field, anything like that, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that people stand the entire game at Texas A&M. They stand the entire game, and when you look at the old images from other points in Texas A&M history, there's a very clear cut military influence, just how it operates. If you look at their band, if you look at the traditions and the cultures, Texas A&M is a very traditional institution. There's so much history and legacy that goes into that space to where folks that are at other institutions, they don't really understand it. But if you do have some idea or some concept or some a point of reference when it comes to the military, you see how tradition is very much ingrained, especially into U.S. military culture. And then also, as an HBCU alumnus, you see a lot of the HBCU traditions, how even though our institutions spread across time zones and regions, there are certain things that are synonymous with our institutions, and seeing how, like in particular, the way HBCUs, how they came into existence and their embeddedness within the community, how that's even reflected within our sport culture. Access to HBCU games are relatively easy. There's a stronger community presence. So while I do go to KU and there's a huge KU fan base, I mean, as someone that grew up in Ohio, I was a fan of KU basketball. But my between looking at myself and my younger sister, we have the luxury of saying like, hey, we had random folks from the community always at our games. We would try to spotlight different schools and different communities so you could see how HBCUs have always been embedded in the community, and even finding a way to where they were still able to create that space to where community members could come into the game. So just operations, you see that there's a very clear cut, like whatever that history was 30, 40, 50, 60, even 100 years ago, is still very much evident now. It may have shaped or twisted a little different, but for the most part, a lot of these core components are still the same.
So interesting that you can bring an analytical lens to this sort of aspect of our lives. I'm curious, how do you involve students in your work?
Oh, so students have randomly reached out. Hey, Dr. Foster, you working on anything? Like, what can I be a part of? I actually have one student. We actually came together and they helped me do a critical analysis or a scoping review of articles published about HBCUs. So within the sport management context, there really hasn't been a lot of articles written about HBCU athletics. So I want to say over a 30-year period, and we reviewed 100 journals. There were only 45 articles written about HBCU athletics. And I've contributed to 3 of those 45. So, and that's within the last 5 years. So we went through, we reviewed every article, read their abstracts, reviewed their information. So the students get a very in-depth, a very detailed overview of how to collect research. I currently have 2 doctoral students who have contributed to a research project where we're looking at realignment and we're looking at institutional identity. So you have all of these schools that have jumped into different conferences. And one of the things about conferences is that there is a sense of collective identity where all of these institutions outside of geographic region, philosophically, these institutions present themselves a specific way to where there's a very clear-cut identity. But now with realignment, these institutions are going into other conferences to where outside of logistically, it doesn't make sense. Now we're seeing, does it make sense for these schools to jump into another conference where their mission statements, vision statements, and things like that, the overall tone of that organization may or may not make sense. And what happens when you do take an outlier or someone from an external group and you put them into this new space? Does the operation of their institution match with the new collection of institutions that they're now a part of?
I can totally relate to that. I grew up in Massachusetts, and when I was 12 years old, I could name every team in the Big East. It was Georgetown and Boston College and Syracuse and Providence and Seton Hall, and they were all schools concentrated in the Northeast. And I felt like the conference had an identity. Syracuse was in there too. And then as the world changed and these conferences got scrambled, like I probably can't name 4 teams in the Big East now, just because at some point I kind of tuned out from keeping track like I used to be able to. So I can totally get it, and I can understand how that would change the identity of what it means for each of those schools and each of the student athletes at those schools to feel like they're part of the conference. So it sounds like you've always been a sports fan. You talked about growing up in Ohio and being a Kansas fan. I'm curious when it occurred to you that you could actually make this your life's work, studying sport. And I ask, as someone who grew up dreaming of being a professional baseball player, spoiler alert, I didn't come close. But at some point, I realized that I could write about baseball. And I wrote a bunch of books, and I worked at ESPN.com. And that brought into my professional life something that I was personally passionate about. I found that path. And I'm curious, for you, growing up, if you could talk a little bit more about what your favorite sports were to play, what your favorite sports were to watch, maybe who your idols were, and when you discovered ultimately that you could be a scholar of sport.
Yeah. Oh man. So I think for me, it really clicked. I actually remember I was in my junior year of high school. My teacher, Miss Taylor, she had a huge chart on her wall of different career paths that you could go into, and essentially how each course you took or how these high school courses, how they would help impact your career. It was a very confusing chart, but somehow, some way, I went through, I looked at the different areas, and I saw sport management as a major. And honestly, I wanted to start off as a statistician. I liked noticing trends. This was, I want to say, this was when somehow, some way, the Charlotte Bobcats could always pull the Lakers card. I don't know what it was, but for like a 3 or 4 year stretch, the Charlotte Bobcats were getting some pretty notable wins against the Kobe Bryant led Lakers. And and my dad, he's like, hey, I don't know what happens, but this team shows up every time against the Lakers, home or away. So that made me want to go into like, okay, what's happening? What's creating this pattern and this trend? Because the Lakers, they were steamrolling through most teams, but the Bobcats gave them issues. So I'm like, okay, I want to study sport management and, kind of go into this path and really learn the industry. And then when I went into undergrad, again, shout out to, the sport management program at Winston-Salem State. I had great faculty members, great classmates, and that really just expanded the scope of what I wanted to do. And while I was in North Carolina, that was actually during the Chapel Hill paper class scandal. And that expanded my desire to learn more about college athletics, student athletes, how people framed it, because that was also during a time where the identity of the student athlete became fractured, and there became this level of distrust and almost like a very negative view towards college athletics. And, for me, at a small D2 institution, the culture there was drastically different. Like we loved it. So it was really interesting to see, like in North Carolina, while people were still Chapel Hill fans, Duke fans, everything else, there was still this underlying conversation of, college athletics needs to change. So
Sayvon, for listeners who aren't familiar, what was that scandal all about?
oh,
Could you sum it
oh
up
yeah.
just for those who don't
Oh
know?
yeah. So essentially the paper class scandal, it came out that for quite a few years, athletes were taking, quote unquote, taking a class at University of North Carolina. Essentially, the class was one paper. They weren't even completing the paper at times, and ended up being a major academic violation where essentially it was a fake class. And it got exposed that athletes over multiple years in multiple sports were taking a fake class as a GPA booster, and that led to a institution-wide investigation, and it actually bled over into a lot of other institutions to where the NCAA wanted to ensure that athletes were actually taking their classes and following the proper academic protocols to maintain eligibility.
Excellent. Thanks for clarifying that. So can you watch a game now and just enjoy a game? I remember when my first baseball park books started coming out, then I would go to a game, and instead of like just enjoying the experience of taking in a game, I'd be studying this aspect of the park or this aspect of the stadium rather than just simply immersing myself in the experience. So can you take the analytical lens off and just be a fan, or are you always kind of a scholar fan now?
I'm definitely a scholar fan. So like in the moment, I can enjoy the game. But as someone who was a sport management in undergrad, did my PhD in sport management, now I teach it. Everything that I've learned, everything that I'm teaching, I have an eye for it now. When I go into a facility, I look at the layout, I look at the fan engagement methods, I look at, I'm still very heavy into the marketing component. A lot of my industry experience was working with sporting goods and sporting retail. So I look at the marketing component. I still pay attention to all of those things, but it also helps to have a wife who is now getting into sports so I can teach her the game a little bit. But I think there's very few times where I can just turn off and truly enjoy the game. But I like to look at it from that perspective because everything that I see, everything that I know is I can then take into the classroom and help my students become a better wave of a better component of the next wave of professionals.
Well, I can definitely relate. So at UNE, we have a brand new College of Business. I think you're aware of that, and it's headed by a big name in your field, Norm O'Reilly. Norm's recognized globally as one of the leading scholars in the business of sport, and he's got a whole bunch of books and case studies with the Harvard-Stanford series, and he speaks all over the place. He joined UNE over the summer, and he headed off to the Paris Olympics and studied the intersection of marketing and sport there. It was really interesting for all of us. So I think there's going to be a lot of people interested in your talk here at UNE. Are you familiar with Norm and the work that he's done in that space?
Yes, I am. So, first and foremost, congratulations to the new College of Business, as well as congratulations to Dr. O'Reilly coming in and being able to lead the charge for that. I'm very excited to see the things that you all will do in the development of all the programs within the College of Business, but with particular attention to my sport management folks.
Well, thank you. Aside from meeting people like Norm and other scholars and students in your field at UNE, I was wondering what some of the other aspects of your Maine visit are that you're looking forward to. You told me you've never been to Maine before, if I remember correctly. So I'm curious, for our listeners who are Mainers, someone coming to us from for a first time, what are some of your expectations for our state, and hopefully we'll live up to them.
All right, so I'm actually pretty outdoorsy. So I love to fish. I love looking at the natural landscape. So I'm very excited to get back near some water. My wife, she grew up in Annapolis, so we've been able to go back to Maryland a few times and just see the water, see the ocean. So I'm very excited to just get back into that space. I'm also a huge seafood fan, which is weird because I'm from the Midwest. So it's very clear I haven't had high quality seafood except for when I've traveled. So being able to get high quality seafood and get it, relatively accessible. I'm very excited for that. But also, I just love learning the culture of different spaces, meeting the people. It's been a warm welcome thus far, and most of it's been virtual and, through Zoom. So being able to get on the campus and, see a new community and, see a new environment, I'm incredibly excited for it.
Well, we definitely have seafood in abundance. We'll have to get you a lobster while you're here. And our campus is right on the water. We have a fishing club right now that's doing a striped bass tournament. And the deal is it's like a 1-month tournament, and you have to catch the fish from on campus, from on UNE grounds, and measure it and enter it into the contest. Unfortunately, I think the stripers will have run south by the time you arrive on October 23rd. But we'll definitely get you outdoors and have you experience some of our great state and the areas around our beautiful campus while you're here. So we don't want to spoil your talk at UNE, but if you had to give a quick elevator pitch that we could share with students and faculty and community members to give us a teaser for what you'll be presenting on campus and how it's meaningful and relevant to our students' lives and our community's life. How would you sum it up as a tease for your event coming up?
Oh, so to sum it up, college sports is so much bigger than just the actual game. A lot goes into, and a lot has gone into all of these different areas. So the experience that you have at UNE isn't just, hey, we're creating this sport experience. We're creating something so much bigger that goes into your classroom experience, your personal experience. It goes into the experience of the community. And you can apply that logic or that perspective to any campus you go to. There's going to be something unique about that sports space that is synonymous with the campus, and it goes even deeper into the community. So if you want to know more, if you want to be able to look at these spaces with a deeper lens, definitely come to the lecture.
Awesome. I think that's a great expression of why the work you do as a sociologist, as a social scientist, why it matters, what its importance is. That's such a great articulation of that. I really appreciate it. Well, Sayvon, we're really looking forward to hosting you at Center for Global Humanities on our Biddeford campus on October 23rd, 2024. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, and we'll see you real soon.
Awesome. Can't wait to get there.
That's it for this episode of Oh the Humanities. As always, thanks for listening, and feel free to tell us what you thought of this conversation on the CGH social media channels: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and X.